acceptance. Diversity is acceptance.
Diversity is life.
Diversity is understanding.
Diversity is priceless.
Acceptance.
All people working together.
Infinite.
Unity. Most definitely unity.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Uncomfortable Conversations That Ignite Change. My name is Joanna Deshay, and I have the great pleasure of serving as Executive Director of DLA. We received such amazing and positive reviews for our dialogue series in 2020. So in 2021, the dialogues continue. Before we begin the formal portion of today's panel, I wanted to kick off today's webinar with a very powerful short film entitled Invisible Man, which is directed by a young film director named Imani Mitchell of IM Studios. This small budding film studio based in Sacramento, California, is dedicated to telling diverse stories from a very unique perspective. The short film is based on the novel of the same name, written in 1952 by Ralph Ellison, and it addresses the social and intellectual issues faced by African Americans in the early 20th century. DLA presents The Invisible Man.
I am an invisible man. No, I am not like the ghost named Casper, nor do I haunt the hallways of the abandoned house on your block. I am indeed a man, with skin, bone, muscle, and brain. But I am invisible, simply because people refuse to see me. I am seen through the distorting and dizzying mirrors of the frenzied funhouse. When they look at me, they see my surroundings, their projections, and even themselves. They see everything and anything except me. My invisibility is no accident. No. It all depends on whose eyes come across me. But I've grown to it. There can be a benefit of being unseen until you start to wonder if you really even exist. Am I a phantom, I ask? Or a figure in a nightmare? When these feelings overwhelm me of feeling unseen, I start to unravel. You affirm your place in the world and your right to exist. You shout at the top of your anguished lungs. You raise your fist to strike at those who did not see you. You cuss, scream, and swear that they will know you. They have to. But they won't. So, why do I continue to write? This torturous, mundane activity that brings me no relief? Because my words, my ideas shall not be forgotten. Why should I experience this nightmare alone? I want others to know the life of the invisible. I played the role of the forgotten, of the underground, of the phantom. But as much as I try, I'm drawn into the light. I am called to do something bigger. Better. I want to be open to love. But I feel protective of my love. Perhaps there is a compromise. My hibernation must come to an end. It is time to come up and breathe and be seen. And when I come up, I will still smell the scent of death in the air. I will know there is much more work to be done. But I must emerge, invisible or not. My words, I had to write. What else could I do? Being invisible without substance, a disembodied voice, I had to share what was true. But does it resonate if your eyes are still looking through? And for the others who understand indeed, I speak for you.
Well, what I want you all to know is, as you watch this film, you will get an idea of what our panel will be addressing and talking about in their discussion. What DLA wanted to do this year with all of the dialogues that we have queued up throughout the year is to take a deeper dive. We really wanted to look at conversations that unearth the deep-rooted systems of inequity and oppression across the board. We wanted to look at it from an education perspective. We wanted to look at systemic repression in healthcare, food systems, and technology. These 2021 dialogues are designed to create spaces where we can all listen and learn and have conversations that are meaningful. Our sole desire is for people to walk away feeling like they have some additional tools that they can use to begin to ask some important questions and to get to the root of the insidious nature of racism and inequity across various systems. We realize that in order for true lasting progress to be made, it is going to take all of us. It's going to take every race. It's going to take every ethnicity, every culture, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and yes, every political affiliation. While we don't have all of the answers now, we have this. We have this forum, this space, this platform, this safe place where our community can come together and we can connect in this powerful way. So this year, we're making a commitment. We're making a personal commitment to move the needle of injustice, constantly pushing ourselves for accountability, driving forward towards social transformation. So let's begin. We begin with the second dialogue in our series, which is entitled Unveiling the Invisible Man. We are looking at the social transformation of seeing and valuing our men of color. In today's workshop, we seek to provide a thought-provoking discussion into understanding the invisible cloak that many of our men of color wear as they navigate through society. Our panel will represent various facets of life and different work stages in their career as they explore the social transformation that they experience as fathers. We've got recent college graduates, professionals, community leaders, and mentors. You as attendees will get to hear about real life accounts and experiences about the lack of belonging that they have experienced through their work employment, through mentoring, and navigating through workplace pressures. This open and honest dialogue will provide you with a valuable perspective of what it's like to be a man of color in the United States and the constant devaluation that they feel as they strive to share their narrative, be authentic, and build strong partnerships and networks. Now, this is a community space, and as a community space, I implore you to ensure that we are always being respectful. So we've got some basic rules of engagement that we ask you to all to abide by. And Brent, can we get those up? And they're very simple. All we ask is that you foster empathy, listen actively, ask questions for clarification, not dominate the discussion in the chat area, really just approach each other with kindness and love, and know that because this is a community space, we reserve the right to remove you if we feel like you are both being disrespectful and disruptive. So those are the community rules of engagement that we have. And we also want you to dig deeper and ask questions if you have something that you really want to just learn more about. That's what the panelists and our moderator are here for. We are so pleased today because we have ASL translation being provided by Equal Access Services. Thank you so much to our interpreters that are here today. I think we've got Stephanie and Heather that are translating for us today. Hope I got those names right. And a special thank you to Dave Wallenhop of Equal Access Services. Thank you very much. We are really grateful to be able to have this be accessible to everyone. So let us begin. Let me introduce you to my friend, our moderator, Mr. Asen Otu, who will be guiding our conversation today. Asen is the Manager of Diversity and Inclusion at SRP, responsible for providing corporate leadership and direction for diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging strategies in support of business objectives and corporate goals. He leads the D&I department and together with his dedicated team, implement and oversee D&I objectives and deliverables in area of training, integration, and measurement. Asen is a purpose-driven executive and leader, and he serves on the DLA, ACF, Vitalist Health Foundation Board, and many, many others. He is a founding member of REAP, which is the Real Engagement Through Active Philanthropy, which is a Black men's philanthropy circle in partnership with Arizona Community Foundation. And he is also a husband and girl dad to 3 amazing daughters. Asen is really moving the needle in terms of social transformation by doing. And he has really been a front DLA board by really helping with the strategic oversight of the board. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm DLA welcome to my fellow Nigerian, Mr. Asen Otu. Asen?
Thank you so much, Joanna. I'm excited to be here today, and I want to thank everyone who joined us today for being here. As you know, and as Joanna mentioned, this month's workshop topic is Unveiling the Invisible Man, the social transformation of seeing and valuing men of color. I think we have a great panel conversation, and our focus is really going to be on transformation, visibility, and value for men of color. And we want to get today started off by doing a quick virtual poll, get everyone engaged right away. And so for those in attendance, the poll question that you'll see, I know my friend Brent is going to bring up, is have you ever felt invisible or devalued in your professional experience? So take a minute to think that over. Go ahead and take the poll. We'll see how folks respond today. So I know Brent is ending the poll. And then can we see, oh, look at that. So first of all, thank you all for responding. It looks like we definitely had the majority of our attendees jump in and respond to the poll. And not surprisingly, many of us have felt invisible or devalued at one point or another in our professional lives, which is why this is an even more important topic to tackle. It's something that I think is in many ways very universal, but has some unique elements when we talk particularly about men of color. So I want to thank you for jumping in and engaging. We'll ask you to do that throughout today's panel and webinar. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to share what we're hoping to get out of today's conversation. So we'll have an opportunity to really, I hope, enhance our ability to listen, to learn, and to empathize in a way that really ensures that we can all feel seen and valued, things that are really universally important, right? We want everybody to also leave today's webinar with a sense of how to play a role in advancing equity, and particularly for men of color. And then lastly, as one of our panelists, Carlos Maven, shared, we just want you to leave full at the end of the workshop today and the webinar. I also want to add one thing, and that is, although today's topic is focused on men of color, much of what we'll talk about will be broadly applicable. So our intent here is not to leave folks out. It's really just to put our attention and spotlight the experience of men of color. And so now that we've set that context, I'm again excited about today's panel and want to introduce our panelists. And I'm joined today by 3 amazing individuals. I'll provide a brief introduction of each of them, and then we'll dive in to seek their perspective on the topic and on our conversation today. So our first panelist is Jacob Quintana, a recent accountancy and business data analytics graduate from the W.P. Carey School of Business at ASU. Go Sun Devils. He's engaged heavily with the Association of Latino Professionals for America, or the ALPFA, which engages students in diversity employment and professional development opportunities in the Western region of the United States. Jacob works for KPMG as an audit associate and is currently studying to complete his CPA exams. So please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Jacob Quintana.
Good morning, Hassan. Happy to be here.
Thanks for being here, Jacob. Our next panelist, Carlos Mavens Jr., joins us all the way from Atlanta, Georgia. Carlos has an unwavering passion for people and works to create opportunities for others to maximize their full potential in life. After graduating from Tennessee State University, Carlos founded Bridge to Leadership in 2016 to bridge the multi-generational gap for young professionals and to help with the transition into adulthood. The program successfully launched initiatives in multiple states since then, and using his platform, Carlos travels across the world, empowering the next generation of leaders, developing strategic partnerships, and consulting organizations on their D&I initiatives. Carlos actually began his professional career as a journalist, and after journalism, spent years working with the National Diversity Council, developing strategic partnerships with Fortune 500 companies. He's now part of the campus recruiting team at Liberty Mutual and is responsible for diversity recruiting programs. So please join me in giving Carlos also a warm virtual welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, man. I feel the love. Thank you.
All right, good. That's what we want.
Yes.
And finally, our last panelist is Mark Pryon. He's an industrial and organizational psychologist based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And Mark thrives on using data and analytics to take an objective perspective to improving human performance. So his focus is on optimizing the selection, development, engagement, and retention of employees through the use of people analytics, assessment, and psychology. Mark specializes in employee selection and change management, has over 10 years of consulting experience working with organizations from financial services, life sciences, manufacturing, and federal and local government. He earned his PhD in business psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, his MA from the Westchester University of Pennsylvania, and an undergraduate from Temple University. He's an adjunct professor in statistics, and his work has been published in the Huffington Post, Forbes, and Fast Company. So please join me in giving Mark a warm virtual welcome today as well. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, Hassan. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Same here. All right. So let's kick off today's panel with some discussion about our opening video, Invisible Man. So I think for many men of color, it's sort of this daily challenge to navigate the world, often with what we might describe as an invisible cloak, right? So I'm interested to hear your reactions and observations to the video, and really what stood out for you there. What parallels do you see in your life within organizations that you work with? I'll start with Jacob, and I'll go to Carlos and then Mark to respond.
Thank you, Hassan. Yeah, my general reactions to the video is, I think it definitely runs parallel to my experience. I think a common thread that I've found throughout engaging with this topic has been that young men of color and all people of color really have to engage with, racial inequity and their identity a lot on than it would appear that their counterparts do. I know in my experiences, it was as early as the age of 13 or 14 where I found myself having these conversations, realizing and the different identities that I had to juggle with throughout my experience. And that was definitely something that stood out to me throughout that video, just how young and willing to engage the individual was.
Right, and I'm glad you point out sort of this having to grapple with identity particularly as young people, right? So this starts early. It starts, and you mentioned, 13, 14, and I think for a lot of folks, that's a point in which we're trying to figure out who we are, right, and to shape our identity. And so, and that continues through a lot of life for many people. Carlos, how about you? What were your observations and initial reactions to the video?
Yeah, man. I have to start off and kind of take us back a little bit. As a Black man here in America, I always go back to where I came from. And it takes me back to the times of slavery. I want to share with you guys a story. So back in the times of slavery, it was illegal for slaves to be able to read, right? Understanding how to read and write. It was illegal. And when you would find a slave that was able to read, what they would do, Essen, is they would take this individual and they would tie him up to a tree in front of everybody, and they would literally whoop him and abuse him just to send a message that if you learned how to read, this is what we would do from you. And there was a saying that would go on back in those days. They would say, slaves are to be seen and not heard, right? And this story resonates with me so much because, a lot of people, they kind of get on the edge when we talk about slavery. It's just one of those topics that a lot of people don't like to visit, but it resonates so deeply with me, Essen, because when we think about slavery, we think that it was so long ago. And I'm here to tell you guys that it wasn't that long ago. My great grandfather, his name is Eugene Porter. Well, he was a victim of this. He was one that learned how to read, and they literally tied him up to a tree and beat him so bad, Jacob, to where he was unconscious, just to send a message to everybody that if you learned how to read and if you shared this with other people, this is what we would do to you. And see, that type of scar, that type of trauma resonates so deeply with us within the African-American community. And it still resonates with us to this day because we hear certain things like, for example, in 2019, there was a reporter that came out to LeBron James and said, hey, man, you need to just shut up and dribble. Did you guys hear that? You guys heard about that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That same, master slave type of privileged mentality still happens today. With so many things just happening, as they mentioned, I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I moved out here last February, 2020, and every day at 12:30, I go out and I go walking every day. And when I moved out here, I moved in a predominantly white neighborhood. That's just the area that I lived in. And shortly after being here, weeks after being here, there was a situation that happened with Ahmad Aubry. I'm sure you guys may have heard of that. Ahmad Aubry, same situation here in Georgia. He was out going for a jog in a white neighborhood, and 3 gentlemen decided to murder him in plain sight. And the crazy thing about it is, I believe it took 74 days for them to finally decide to realize who the murderers were and to finally decide to convict them of a murder charge. And when I see this type of involvement and these type of actions happening in society, I think to myself, I am Ahmad Aubry. That's me. That's my journey. That's what I deal with in this society every day. And just imagine, we hear these types of things happening all the time. And, it's so unfortunate that people are becoming, unsensitive to these types of issues because it happens so much. And I just think to myself, when I think about being invisible in this society, this could happen to me tomorrow. That could be me. And then what the world would just move on, Right. And that's what, when we talk about being invisible and being here in society, and my first impressions of just thinking about that topic thinking about being 29 years old, you know, here in America, I feel often that society doesn't value African American men. That's what I feel, you know, and if it was me, I just feel like, you know, the next day life will go on. And we've had a lot of progress, and people, oh, we had a Black president, oh, we've come a long way. Yeah, but you know, when we see, you know, comments being made like to LeBron James, and when we see the Ahmad Aubry situation happening, we know that, yeah, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go.
Yes.
And those were just my initial thoughts. I know I got heavy. I know
Hey,
I went, Jacob,
come on, Carlos.
I know I got heavy, man. But listen, this is real, man. This is just real life for us. These are our everyday experiences. But I tell you, Essen, 2020, man, this is going to stop. You know, this is the time for us to step out. This is the time for us to have these types of conversations. And I feel like there is a shift that's going to be taking place. And I feel optimistic for the next generations ahead. And I feel like, you know, eventually we would get to a place where we feel safe in our own country.
Yeah.
But that's just my first impressions.
I appreciate that first impression. I mean, you put a lot into that response that I know we want to touch on at different points in the panel. I think one of the important kind of overall things that you shared is, you know, we have lived experiences that, you know, that really shape, you know, the pressure that we navigate every day, right? You mentioned trauma, you mentioned some of the psychological impacts of particularly what happened last year. And I know we want to acknowledge that and get into that and understand that was tough for a lot of us, right? In this country and having to navigate that, and we still are. It still continues, and a lot of what you shared historically is maintained now in different ways, right? But thank you for that perspective on kind of the parallels from the video, and I want to go to Mark now, particularly around that. You know, your reactions to the video. Some of what came up there in terms of that, in what Carlos and Jacob said, as far as identity and obviously, you know, the psychological aspect, which is your specialty, right? And so when you see a video like that, you may see it a little bit different from the rest of us and may pick up on other things. So what did you think? What were your reactions?
Well, Carlos, I don't know if we could say well said enough. But that was incredible kind of the historical context and that history only doesn't just hit on us in our own lifetime. Nations are important and meaningful and impactful. One thing from the video that actually stood out really well to me and really hit home was the line that the young man said, you know, my ideas will be heard. And that was something that resonated with me a lot, because I think about, well, what are the missed opportunities that we have as a society by making people invisible and hiding them behind the cloak that you mentioned, SN, right? What are the things that the great ideas that are the missed opportunities, that are the cures or the fixes or the other things that might come out of having different people at the table and having the right people at the table. Edgar Schein, who's the father of the idea of corporate culture, talks about culture not being, do we get along? Do we like each other? Do we have ping pong tables and beer kegs in our offices? Do we wear jeans on Friday, right? That's not culture, but culture are a shared group of behaviors, right? Do we like to collaborate? Do we like to make decisions in particular ways? When you know, I've worked with so many different organizations where they were, you know, they'd go into interviews and they'd think about the airport bar test, right? If, you know, at the end of the day, if we got our flight delayed and I got stuck at the airport bar with this person for 4 hours, you know, would I be able to tolerate them? And that kind of, that's how you end up with a lot of white dudes in a room together, right? Oh, you went to Penn State, I went to Penn State. Oh, you know, Tennessee State, where is that? I don't, you know, what town is that in Nashville? I love Nashville. Those types of things, right? They don't lead to a good corporate culture, and corporate culture, and we'll talk a lot about these things later on, is kind of what I look at and what I'm thinking about is, do we have people in a room together that can solve those problems? And you know, I want those different ideas, because that's where creativity comes from. That's where innovation comes from. That's where ideas come from. That's where we move not only organizations, but society forward. When we get those people in a room together, you look at things like the Manhattan Project, right? And some of the ways that group of individuals was put together was they purposefully wanted people from different backgrounds and different specialties, different ideas. They brought in different immigrant groups to make sure that they were represented, because they knew that this was a problem that incremental thinking wasn't going to work. You know, organizations move through evolution or revolution, right? And it's that incremental versus big bang type of idea. And so that's what I'm thinking about when I look at a video like that, or what are the missed opportunities, and what are the things that we can do within our organizations now, within the workplaces now, to make sure that we have the right people around the table.
Thank you, Mark. I think that's great that you bring up kind of the opportunities piece, because yeah, in my work, when I talk about diversity and inclusion and equity and belonging, the ultimate goal is to really, you know, as it said, I think in multiple of more than one of your bios, maximizing human potential, right? Which is really trying not to miss opportunities and to really leverage what people bring to the table, right, into organizations, et cetera. So definitely hoping we can pull out and tease out some of those strategies, tools, and have people walk away with some things they can really engage in their own lives and really leverage. So a little bit of a shift in terms of topic here, but definitely related. So allyship. So some of us have had allies in our lives who've used their platform to advocate for us where we've lacked privilege, right? And so allyship, when I think about it, is often an act of courage, because there could be risk involved, right? I've seen people really put themselves in the line of fire, if you will, when they didn't have to, because of the principles that they believe in, and, you know, in this spirit of equity and fairness. And so again, for all of our panelists, what are some things that you've observed or behaviors that you've seen allies apply really effectively to help elevate the voices of people that often go unheard? And I'll kind of go with the same order. We'll go Jacob, Carlos, and then Mark.
Yeah, so I think something that's stood out to me as far as allyship and how I've experienced that is kind of striking this balance of, you know, allowing others to be heard, but also upon hearing what others have to say, then taking a lead and making sure that you are providing something to the table there. I think there's often some sense of anxiety around, you know, how am I able to lead in this role if I myself am not experiencing certain marginalizations throughout my experience. But, you know, it really is sort of this, you know, call and response activity that I've found to be the most effective in terms of, okay, how can we reference the people who are experiencing this marginalization, hear them out and understand what the real issues are, as opposed to, you know, taking on a completely proactive approach and saying, okay, here's what I think the issues are, not coming from a perspective that, you know, would face that sort of marginalization. And then upon hearing those concerns or those issues that we feel need to be addressed, taking those in stride and making sure that those are being addressed. And so really just that call and response has been highly effective in my experiences and is highly appreciated from both sides, and getting people involved and having this buy-in collectively.
And so, Jacob, what I hear you saying is kind of pointing out that one really critical element to allyship is seeking understanding and awareness of people's experiences, right? Lived experience, etc. And then figuring out, where do I have an opportunity or a role to play? How can I engage in allyship based on that? But really it being a two-way kind of back and forth opportunity for folks to contribute, to learn, to take risks together in some senses, right? So really great points there. How about for you, Carlos? What have you observed or seen allies really effectively do to help elevate those voices?
All right, so here we go, man. You know, I got some heavy hitters this morning. I'm coming with. Okay, so this is the first thing I've noticed, Essen. I've heard people say, "Oh, I'm an ally to the Black community because my roommate in college was Black," or "Hey, I'm not racist. My sister-in-law, she married a Black guy." You know, I've heard these types of comments, right? And I think that perception of allyship, we have to address it. You know, in order to really truly be an ally, you have to really go out of your way to help provoke change for the underrepresented, those undeserved communities. For me, for example, one of my areas that I'm really focusing on is gaining a better understanding of the LGBT community. You know, that's a community that I don't identify with, but I'm strongly an ally with everything that they're going through. I sympathize with the things they're going through as I'm educating myself with the transgender movement. And I'm educating myself on some of the things that they go through in corporate America, you know, with just the pride movement and all that type of stuff. And so within my company, I'm a pride ambassador with our ERG at Liberty Mutual. And so I think it goes further with just saying, you know, I'm an ally, and it goes with really trying to provoke change. One of the things that I think that is so important, you know, Essen, is gaining allyship from people that are in power. You know, I've seen a lot of companies that they'll say, "Oh, we have diversity and inclusion on the website." Y'all know how they go. You know, when the George Floyd situation happened, you know, you hear people, "Oh,
everybody got in," right?
You know, you put out a statement, all that. We've seen all of that, right? But are you really putting the dollars in the support to support change? Are you really going out of your way to create an inclusive environment, you know? And I'll give you an example. This is why it's so important to gain people that are in power to become allies. Last year, when the George Floyd situation happened, I remember vividly, there's a holiday that we celebrate in the South. It's called Juneteenth. Anybody ever heard of Juneteenth? Anybody ever heard?
We celebrate it here too.
Right. Well, you know, a lot of places, they had no idea about what Juneteenth was. Now, when the George Floyd situation happened and the protests was going on, all that, when Juneteenth came around, a lot of companies made that a national holiday. And they were able to kind of pay their employees, you know, to take off that day to celebrate and recognize the holiday. And see, just a simple change just like that could happen when you have the allyship from people that are in power. You know, that, I mean, just a simple, a simple change that can happen. And so when we talk about allyship, we have to gain the support from these C-suite executives. We have to gain the support from older white men. We have to really have these type, you know, it's okay to have the grassroots conversations like we've been doing, but to really provoke change, I think it always starts at the top. It starts at the top and it really trickles down with any organization. When you don't have the support from executives, there's only so much that you can do. You're always going to run into that glass ceiling because you're not going to be able to get the support that you need to provoke true change. So that's one of the critical things I want to point out to anybody that is affiliated with any corporate organizations or even in higher ed. You know, it's important to gain allyship from people that are in power. You know, when you have your corporate dinners and when you're going on coffee dates, these are the type of conversations that you just kind of want to bring up to gain the allyship from all different types of people. And everybody could be an ally. You know, I'm a person of color, like I mentioned before. I'm really connecting with the LGBT community. You know, just because you are an Asian man, you know, that don't mean you can't support the things that Hispanics are going through. You know, you always want to go out of your way to connect with everybody. And that's where true allyship takes place.
Yeah, well said, Carlos. I appreciate what you said, particularly about the, how we define allyship, because and some people would tell you you're not an ally until a particular group assigns you that title, because they recognize that you have been an ally for us, right? And I think there's a spectrum there, but you're absolutely right in terms of really, gaining support from the grassroots and grass tops. And you gave the example of employee resource groups, right? Something we have at SRP, my company. And one thing that we're really pushing folks to do is to think about allyship within the context of joining an employee resource group they might not personally identify with, right? Yeah. So back to Jacob's point, how do you gain understanding? How do you grow in your empathy? You do that through proximity. You get closer to people that are different from you, right? And
yeah.
So I certainly think all of what you said there applies and gives some tangibility to that. And I want to make sure to bring Mark in. We've got so many great things to talk about, and I want to make sure we keep things going. But Mark, your perspective on allyship as you navigate both the many hats that you wear, right, and the organizations that you work with. What have you seen and really observed, understanding the behavioral elements of that?
Sure. So I think one of the big problems historically is kind of what Carlos mentioned, right? An event happens, people say something, and then it's not in vogue anymore. So they stop talking, right? It falls out of your news feed on Facebook, or it's not in the headlines anymore. And so, oh yeah, that was that thing that we did that one time, happens, unfortunately. And so that's where I think talk is cheap when it comes to allyship. I think that it is personally something that its actions speak louder than words, and it's making systemic changes and actually being part of the solution. It's Jacob, you mentioned good leadership there, right? It's the core of change management theory, which is actually being a sponsor and driving change and answering the question, what's in it for me? Because unfortunately, this is the right thing to do doesn't resonate with a lot of people the right way. But this is what we should be doing, and this is why we should be doing it. And this isn't just how it moves one group or people ahead, but this is how it moves society forward. And this is how it moves our organization forward. And this is how these are the results that we are going to get and all benefit from by making sure that we're including and increasing the visibility of everybody. Because I don't think that just speaking about it and having the conversation, and sure, companies put their Super Bowl ad dollars towards it this year, but next year there'll just be frogs drinking beer again. And what are the things that can do that actually drive things forward and drive the conversation?
Yeah, sustained push, right? And I think last year was one of those. Everybody jumped into the conversation. Folks wanted to figure out what they could do, what role can I play, and I think that has carried into 2021. But I think what's on everyone's mind is how long will we sustain this? How deep will allyship go, and how much buy-in will we see? How much sponsorship will we see in the long term? Particularly, from leadership within organizations. And so I think allyship, my hope is that really evolves and grows and maintains momentum in a way that we haven't seen before. So just kind of, again, taking a little bit of a switch, and I want to just share, I think, as a man of color, there have been times in my professional life where, I've felt undervalued, I've felt overlooked, and that's been difficult to overcome. I listened to a podcast recently where the guest was a really successful startup founder who founded a couple of different companies and sold them, but he'd been helping to coach other emerging founders, right? Founders of color, particularly Black men. And he said the one thing that he saw consistently, saw them struggle with was confidence, right? And so just thinking about, and I want to direct this question specifically to Jacob and Carlos, as you all reflect and you've shared some of this, some of your experiences where you felt, that invisibility, that feeling of being devalued. What emotional impact did that have on you? Because we rarely dive into really talking about the emotional impact these things have, right? We talk about the after effects, we talk about the larger impact of it, but how does it impact us individually on a personal level? What do you think, Jacob? How about for you?
Yeah, I mean, speaking to my own experiences, it absolutely does have an emotional impact. And I think the strongest example I can provide of that is in having these conversations about, identity, whether that be racial, ethnic, et cetera. There have been instances where I've had discussions with people who are allies and I would consider close personal friends of mine who, whether intentionally or unintentionally, have really devalued the experiences and the identities that I bring to the table. One conversation I can recall specifically is, being a Hispanic American, being in the state of Arizona, being Mexican American specifically. There's this conversation that goes on about, being stuck in this limbo state where being Hispanic American doesn't technically qualify as a racial group. It's more so an ethnic group. And in this conversation I was having with a group of friends and colleagues of mine, it was this discussion of, it's like, well, are you racially white? Are you technically Caucasian? And then where does being Hispanic and where does your ethnicity come into play? And the conclusion of this conversation, it was what really left me, kind of, emotionally scarred, which was just that there was this conversation that was trying to be put forth that, being Hispanic, since there's so many people across the world that span the globe who identifies either Hispanic or Latino, that doesn't technically meet a more traditional definition of ethnic group, which may be more specific to even like a specific region of a specific country. And so there was this conversation, debate going on as to whether being Hispanic would actually qualify as an ethnicity versus a race. And, just being a part of that identity of, not really being sure of, okay, how do I identify on this form that I'm filling out? I don't technically identify, as any other race outside of Caucasian, but, my identity doesn't necessarily fit that. I think I mostly identify as Hispanic or Latino or, and to not have that feel validated and to even have conversations with people who are physically in front of you and telling you, the identity that you identify most strongly with doesn't technically classify as one of the two major things that we think about when we think about people's racial and ethnic backgrounds. And I think all that being said, it's more so just, it doesn't necessarily have to come from an intentional place of hurt, but having that your experience devalued by others is definitely something that has a very strong emotional connection to that. And I think people should become aware of that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think, what you felt in that moment, I think many folks have felt that in different ways. And I think that's an interesting conversation that you were having around identity and where do people fit in these constructs that we've created around race and ethnicity in some sense. And when that's questioned or pushed back and invalidated in terms of how you personally identify, right? Because we all get the opportunity to do that for ourselves. What does that do, right? How does that, feel like a punch in the gut, if you will? So appreciate you sharing that, Jacob. How about you, Carlos? What are the feelings that kind of come up in those instances where, you're just feeling like you know, my experience here and is really being devalued, and I'm feeling invisible.
Yeah, I can remember. So first off, one thing that I want to mention when we talk about diversity that may not get spoken about a lot is ageism and bridging the multi-generational gap within the workplace. You know, for the first time, we have 4 different generations in the workforce right now with the baby boomers,
right,
Gen Z, you know, I'm sorry, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z in the workforce. And so it's an interesting time because companies are being forced to change their cultures a bit to be more adaptive for some of the younger employees. If your company is not into tech, then it's being challenged. If your company is not into social media, then it's being challenged in a way. And I can remember being in a meeting with different executives, and we were just talking about different systems and different ideas and different initiatives and things to do. And I thought about doing like LinkedIn Live, doing LinkedIn Live, different events and programs. And when I mentioned it, you know, people just instantly started laughing. Like, oh, nobody's going to take that seriously. Nobody's going to participate. Nobody's going to engage in that type of conversation. And it was such a small gesture, but just to hear the response that people made, I was like, I just threw out an idea. And they quickly just, you know, overlooked my idea and kind of went on to, you know, the rest of the conversation and didn't, you know, acknowledge my, you know, opinion at all. And it's such a small, you know, situation, but at that moment, it made me feel like, what am I doing here? I mean, really, why am I here? You know, if my opinion doesn't matter, if I'm not being valued, like what am I here for? If you guys aren't being open and innovative to new ideas, like what am I here for? And I'll be honest with you, I'm a really secure person. But at that moment, I began to kind of second guess myself a little bit. And it did, you know, take a little, you know, emotional toll on me. Like, well, am I doing something wrong? You know, am I not good enough? You know, some ideas that I would kind of throw out, it just got pushed out the window, you know, because I was kind of challenging the system a bit. And, you know, ageism is one of those things that, you know, may not get talked about a lot, but it's a real serious thing within the workforce that I see so often, you know, just because you don't have any millennials that sit on the board of directors, you know, or in the C-suite, you know, a lot of times people feel like our opinions may not matter when it comes to decision making. And I've seen it so many times. You know, this is not just my experience. I've had these types of conversations. And that's something that needs to be addressed. You know, that's something that we really have to look after. You know, when you're talking about the future of our workforce, you know, if your company wants to, you know, be successful over the next 100 years, then you have to find a way to connect with the younger generation. You have to find a way to become more innovative and more inclusive with different ideas and different thoughts, you know? Yeah. So that was just, you know, an experience that I had that I felt devalued and invisible at that moment, you know? And then one of the guys, I'm having a little therapy moment here. One of the guys said in the meeting, he says, I'm a big guy. He says, man, you big enough to be a linebacker. You play football, right? And everybody started laughing in the meeting. And I'm like, is this cool? Nobody. And I said, you know that was rude, right? You know what I mean? And so these types of things happen all the time, all the time, you know, and you know, it has to be addressed. You know, we have to make a change and really open up this safe space to hearing people's stories. You know, I'm not the only one. The attendees that's listening, everybody's had something that they've gone in moments where they felt invisible. And I felt like, who could I talk to? Who could I call on at that moment? Who has my back? You know? So, you know, it's the everyday struggle, man.
It is, right? And I think that the challenging part is a lot of these things end up, you know, emerging as, you know, microaggressions.
Yes.
Right. So they're very subtle,
yes.
but they build up over time, and they could be, you know, related to lots of different factors. And you bring up the layer of diversity around generational diversity, right? And I know we're going to talk a little bit about workforce and the implications of that, but you know, SRP, we're getting ready to have some conversations around generational diversity and ageism, right? We've got that spectrum going too, right? From folks who are interning with us to people who are getting close to retirement. And how do we really leverage the value in having all of these generations there? But you know, in talking to people, you'll hear, right, that there's an emotional impact of not feeling like your voice, your ideas, your opinions are being incorporated into decision making within your organization, and it can be really tough. So Mark, in your work, how do you see that emotional impact and that toll play out for employees and organizations where they experience that lack of visibility or value as they contribute?
Sure. No, I think that that's a great question, and almost, you know, complementary to what Carlos was just talking about, because in that room and in that situation, what's the environment and the culture of what's okay and what's not okay to say, right? What are the standards of what people are willing to or able to say, and that trickles into, you know, from the moment that you learn about an organization and you start to really go through the process, right? It's called the organizational socialization process, right? How somebody comes into the company, learns the rope, right? That's where the standards and the practices. And I've sat in on interviews and, you know, watch how clients go through things and how clients are selecting employees, and they don't realize that those little conversations, those little things that you do where you think that you're building rapport, that's actually some of the microaggressions that you're talking about. Right? When you're starting to talk to people, oh, you went to Penn State, what year did you graduate? You're being ageist there. You don't realize it. You're starting to uncover it. You might be, oh, I see that you grew up. What high school did you go to? Oh, well, okay, you're just sizing up the socioeconomic status of somebody's parents. It has nothing to do about the job, and it has nothing to do with what actually matters. But then some of those things become the norm within the organization, and those are the things that are it's okay to talk about it, right? Carlos, you talk about the football conversation. I have a really good friend who's a man of color, and he gets asked all the time, and we'll be out or we be with people, and he'll start getting asked about basketball. The guy has season tickets to the New Jersey Devils. He's a huge hockey fan, but people just feel the need to have that conversation with him. And it's, you know, nobody starts asking me about baseball or random things. You know, it's not a common thing, and it's inappropriate. But that's what becomes the norm in some of the microaggressions that you talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think it is really putting a lens on an organization and asking those questions about what is acceptable and challenging those norms, right? Speaking up. I know it's hard to do, but it does take that, you know, people to speak up to really begin to shift cultures and to begin to, you know, pick apart that status quo. And so thank you for sharing that perspective. Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to ask there about what are, you know, going back to the allyship conversations, and going back to, that's where a lot of society and a lot of organizations, the uncomfortable conversation or the uncomfortable silence is something that is frowned upon, right? That we don't talk about, right, politics and religion and race unless you don't realize it, and you're saying it in an inappropriate way, unfortunately. And so from the allyship perspective, that's where the person needs to speak up, right? That's where the talk and the action are the same, in my opinion. That's where hey, that's not what we do here. That's not how we do things. That's where I see the opportunities, and that's the, you know, SN, you talked about the courage piece of it, but that all comes into the underlying culture of the organization, right? And I talk about organization, or I talk about culture, right? Whether it be societal, whether it be within the workplace, whether it be within, you know, Jacob, you talk about your group of friends, right? There's a certain culture of a group of people and what's okay and what's not okay there, and opening yourself up to, look for uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, we got to get more comfortable being uncomfortable, right, Carlos?
Yeah, that's why it's so important to have diverse leadership within your organization. Because sometimes, if your leadership all looks one way, right, there's a lack of awareness that's present in that room. So when these types of comments are being made, I know another friend of mine, my good friend Raisha, she works for a railroad company. So we know the railroad industry historically, is very conservative, the industry. And they said, well, we want to really go ahead and decorate our office for Black History Month. So Raisha, we're going to go ahead and leave it up to you, right? Those microaggressions that happen, that you talked about. And I know we're talking about men here, but these things, and it's so important to have people of leadership that represents diverse makeup, because if there was a Black person that identified, that connected with me, they could speak up on my behalf. They can say, hey, that's not right. Or, hey, you can't say that, those types of comments, because I'm fearful of making those type of comments because of the risk of losing my job. I don't know how to, confront people without, being the angry Black guy. And, we've seen that before in the office, here he goes again, getting the attitude. He's, getting loud with everyone. So that's why it's so important when we talk about evoking change to have a diversity makeup of leadership, so that everybody's voice can be amplified. Everybody could be represented and defended in many situations.
And there's a why to that, right? As well. There's not just, it's the right thing to do, and this is what's going to actually create a better work environment and a better work culture that you're talking about. But I don't think that it's a coincidence that when there's two or more minorities on the board or on a leadership team of our company, they've been shown to outperform the S&P 500. And there is all of the other things that come into this that often get overlooked and often are not publicized, but there are plenty of investment firms that are talking about impact investing, and they're talking about minority-owned companies, and they perform better for a reason, because they get diversity of thought, and diversity of backgrounds leads to diversity and creativity. And there are a lot of different things that lead. And when we talk about the what's in it for me and why and how to anchor a conversation, it doesn't make just good societal sense, but it makes great business sense.
Yes, hey, talk about it, bro.
Yes, I think you got full agreement on that, and I know that we're all trying to, help people really understand and shift their thinking around D&I to really seeing the business impact, right? And I think we're on the cusp of really gaining momentum there as well. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Mark. So I'm gonna, one thing I wanna mention is I see a lot of folks in the chat. Keep that going. I think that's one way that we supplement our learning in these webinars, is by reading and seeing what other people throw in the chat. Lots of examples I've seen come up, and great comments just supporting everything that we've talked about so far. So I want to do a little bit of switching so we can kind of maintain our time and still get to some of the questions I know we wanted to throw out to the panel. So I'm gonna take us back a little bit. I remember watching a show called A Different World, right? And we'll see the generational diversity within the crowd based on who knows what I'm talking about. But this show was set at the fictional Hillman College, right? And it depicted students at this historically Black college and the community that they were able to establish while they were in school there, right? And so Carlos, as a graduate of an HBCU, right? Tennessee State, you've likely experienced that Hillman-esque sense of belonging that many students experience at HBCUs. But how do we, I guess, manage the pressures to conform and help foster that same sense of belonging for men of color in the workplace, right? How do we take that special sauce at Hillman and apply that to where you work, where I work, where others really have to show up every day and try to be their authentic selves?
I think first of all, I want to give a shout out to TSU. TSU.
All right, represent.
So, there's a few things to that, Essen. First off, I have my organization, Bridge to Leadership, and we work with college students. Our whole idea is to help them with their transition into adulthood. And one of the things I did was we focus on 3 areas: education, empowerment, and exposure, the E3. And so one of the things that was very important to me was I went in 2019, I went and looked at 2 universities, one PWI, primarily white institution, and then Tennessee State, HBCU. And I looked at career fairs, and I looked at how many Fortune 500 companies were in attendance at both universities. Now get ready, Essen. It's about to blow your mind. Get ready. At the PWI, there was 56 companies that was represented at the career fair, right? And when I looked at the HBCUs, there were only 4. Only 4 Fortune 500 companies that was at the career fair. And it blew my mind. I was like, wow. So when we talk about exposure, that's a critical piece, because sometimes we just don't have the same opportunity and resources that some of the larger universities, the Dukes, the USCs, the Harvards, those large universities may have. So I think it's very important for companies to go out of their way to really connect and really build these relationships with some of the smaller universities, some of the HBCUs that just don't have those types of relationships from a recruiting standpoint. And that's one of the things that I'm bringing, to my organization, just being able to bridge that connection and develop new strategic partnerships to change the workforce. So I think it's very important to have that opportunity for exposure. And then the other thing, from a student perspective, I think we need to target the students earlier, because some schools, they put a lot of focus on college readiness and preparing you for life after graduation and resume building and all that type of stuff. But some universities don't. So we have to look at that system, and that is a systemic situation that we can talk about. It's another conversation, but we have to start early, freshmen and sophomores, having them to get internship opportunities, so that they can get acclimated, so that they can get acquainted with what it's like just being in the world. And one of the problems, man, you got me sweating over here. You got me excited.
You're going.
One of the problems in the educational system is a lot of professors are teaching this information to students based off of theory, right? And they're not giving them these real practical principles that they need. I'll give you an example. And the people in the audience, you guys can relate to this, right? Because this is what I was told. If you go back to school and you get a 2nd degree, that means you're going to make more money.
Yeah.
So, I come to my employer and, my manager, and I say, hey, I'm working on my MBA. So, I'm possibly looking for a raise. And she was like, just because you get an MBA, that doesn't automatically qualify for a raise. But see, that's a misconception that some of the educators are kind of preaching to these students, Yeah. And it's a lot of things that we have to really address. But I think that, really focusing on targeting these students at a young age, really
awareness and access,
get them the exposure, get them the training, that professional development that they need to be successful, instead of trying to find an internship your last semester of college, it's kind of scrambling and finding your way. So that's something I think we need to really address.
Yeah, appreciate that perspective, and you bring up some great points around that creating more access, exposure, and awareness for students. And I think the topic that we're talking about today is, can be put under this larger umbrella of, social issues, right? And I think 2020, again, was a year that introduced this necessity for organizations to begin acknowledging and addressing, all of the social disruption that was occurring, but also things that have been happening for a long time, right? And But up until I would say last year, a lot of what was talked about was very, very taboo, had never come up. It was off limits in the workplace. And so this question's for Jacob. How do you think we can continue to make it all right to discuss social issues like race or equity, right? Social equity in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that that conversation needs to really be recognized as something that's continuous. I think that's how you make it okay to continually talk about that thing. I think some of the items that we've touched on already that have been major talking points in the last 5 to 10 years, or at least my understanding of it, being a 23-year-old, I may not be able to speak as to the historical significance of it. But like things like microaggressions that we're talking about, and implicit bias, and how that factors into the workplace. At this point, at least in having just graduated, are things that may sound like a little cliche, or some things that we may beat into the ground. But I think it's important that we sort of establish that understanding, because as I referenced, it's a continuous process, and we need to, like, for lack of a better term, continue to push the goalpost of our understanding and try to reach higher equity in all aspects of our lives. And so to have those concepts that come up continually, and for us to build upon our understanding, is very important. And to understand that it's not just educating everyone and finding common ground up to a certain point. It's trying to reach those pinnacles even beyond that.
Yeah, I like that phrase of pushing the goalpost, because that doesn't happen by not keeping your foot on the gas, right? If you will, that really happens by consistently addressing things and consistently educating ourselves around the opportunities that exist. And a few years ago, I heard a speaker who really got me thinking about the value of belonging. I know we talk about it a lot now, but several years ago, we weren't having conversations around belonging. And as I did my research after hearing that speaker, I came across this framework for belonging, which is a continuum. And it talks about ensuring that people within organizations not just feel welcome, but they feel included, right? Making sure that people feel psychologically safe enough to fully plug in and engage, and then commit to being there, and then finally having a true sense of belonging, right? And I think that's really easier said than done. You look at this continuum, a lot of organizations probably say, oh, we're about here, we're further down on the continuum, but the reality is that many organizations get stuck just trying to create that safe space for people to feel welcome and included, right? Establishing that psychological safety piece. And so for Mark, as an organizational and industrial psychologist, how do you help organizations really focus on creating a culture of psychological safety that leads to belonging?
That's a great question, Hassan. And what you actually hit on in kind of setting up the question actually has the answer on it in it, and it's employee engagement. We talk about employee retention, and I think that, Carlos, what you're talking about from the recruitment perspective and getting people in, and I completely agree with you, it's the top of the funnel. It's getting as many kids into the top of the funnel when they're young as possible. But if they walk in through the doors to the interview and there's nobody there that looks like them, or there's no one there who went to the same schools as them, or there's no one there who has their background, is that a place where they're going to go and be set up to fail? And is it what's worse for us to have somebody who doesn't get a job, or for somebody to go into a role and leave 6 months later because it wasn't the right place for them? And what actually sets them behind when they have a gap in their resume? And what are the things that hurt them in the long-term part of their career? And so that's some of the things that I think about is, well, why are people leaving? And that should be a question, right? And that's something where, asking people about the turnover of their people of color, that's a number that we should be tracking as organizations. And those are things that should be tracked as in HR departments. And so I want to come back on the idea of employee engagement, and because that's actually one of the most powerful predictors of performance. An engaged person or the engaged workforce, people who are highly engaged are higher productivity, higher profitability, lower turnover, higher performance, higher customer service type metrics, but then they also show that the individuals have higher psychological well-being, reduced turnover, increased employee satisfaction, lower likely to be burned out. And so by engaging the workforce and focusing on not the smile face surveys that so many organizations use for employee engagement, but actually the meat behind employee engagement, because employee engagement is made up of 3 different key components. Psychological safety that you talked about, right? Do people have the opportunity to try new things? Do they have the opportunity to say what they think in a meeting and not feel like Carlos, who felt like he had repercussions for saying different things? The other piece of it is availability, right? Do people have the resources to do it? Do you have the opportunity to throw yourself into your work the way that you want to? And the last part is meaningfulness, right? Do people feel connected to the goals of the organization? Do they have that, I can achieve my career goals through this company? This place is a place for me to want to give it my all. And I think that by creating those systemic areas and those systemic changes, you're going to see a lot of the things that we've talked about happen. It's that mediator moderator approach for anybody who's got a little bit of a statistics background.
Yeah, and I think those are a lot of great nuggets there in terms of creating that environment and culture that really engages people in a way that that leads to that real sense of belonging and that employee wellness on a different level too, which I think is ultimately what we want for folks within organizations to feel like, they can show up, they can engage, they feel good about what they're doing, their contributions, and really feel like this is where I belong, right? I love coming to work. So appreciate that perspective and your expertise there. I'm sure some folks in the audience participating today are probably asking themselves, maybe I'm not in a role where I have an opportunity to influence a lot of this. What power do I have to affect, issues around, value and voice, right, from my colleague, right? Or, and I want to, again, because this came up early, encourage people to think about mentorship and sponsorship. And I know folks on the panel are huge advocates for that. And Jacob, like you, I'm an ASU grad. I mention that again because I have to. That's my responsibility.
Go Devils.
My first job out of undergrad was working for a national social justice organization here at their Arizona office. And my first boss out of undergrad ended up being a mentor of mine to this day, right? She's somebody that really extended her privilege to support and sponsor and position me for opportunities throughout my professional life. So not just with that first job, but beyond that, right? And so for Jacob and Carlos, how can organizations and individuals evolve in that ability to create a sense of belonging through mentorship and sponsorship? So I want y'all to talk a little bit about that. Jacob, why don't you start first?
Sure. I think mentorship and sponsorship is huge, especially in diversity and inclusion role. I think a lot of times, and I can speak to this personally as well too, there's issue within our communities as far as, having representation, but then as a result of that, there not being a great infrastructure to getting people to those jobs, to those industries that are underrepresented with the identities that people find themselves in. In the field of public accounting, the field that I work in, it's very underrepresented as far as Native Americans, Black and Hispanic and Latino people go, as they find themselves in that group. And so having mentorship, not just within your own social and organizational environments, but also within the workplace is highly important. I don't think I would be at the company or reach the goals that I've reached so far in my career if it weren't for mentorship, both in my company and outside of it. And so really having that mentorship and being able to have that infrastructure to provide people a path to combat underrepresentation in their companies is highly important and absolutely a factor as well.
Agree. Great points there. Carlos, how about you? You're still muted.
All right. I totally agree, you know, especially from a retention standpoint, you know, when you're talking about the development and the retention in order to keep talent, like some of the things Mark was talking about. You know, I've seen a lot of companies implement these mentorship programs internally that helps with the development, that helps with connecting people that identify like you know, when you see other people that look like you in the workplace that can help you to grow. And it makes you feel a little more inclusive, and it makes you feel a little more empowered. And that's a really big deal with just helping people, you know, just being able to say, hey, you're doing a great job. You know, I want to be able to pour into you and help you along the way. And then executive sponsorship is very important, you know, especially when we talk about, so a lot of companies, they're implementing these employee resource groups, which I think is really great with employee engagement. It's great with diversity and inclusion initiatives. It's great with retention and diversity recruiting, all those types of things. It's great with community relationships. I mean, you know, I see it all the time, you know, where a lot of some of the C-suite executives would want to be an executive sponsor for, you know, like I mentioned earlier, the Pride ERG, to say, hey, we want to not only support you guys, but we want to sponsor you guys so that you can be involved in the community, so that you can go out and be able to recruit at the HBCU, so that you could be in the parade, just to connect with people in the community that may identify with you. You know, being able to use your power, use your privilege, use your platform to be able to pour into different employee resource groups and different, you know, groups within the company to be able to pour in the community. And that's where real change takes place. And I think that executive sponsorship is so important. You know, if there's anyone that's participating that, you know, may be a vice president or a director within their company, you know, it's so important to consider, you know, being a sponsor to a group of students or a group of young people. Not only that, but just to be able to share information, share insight. I love experience and I value experience. You know, if you've worked at your company for 30 plus years, there's no way that we could replace that experience. It's invaluable. It's nothing like experience, but in order to empower the next generation, you have to be able to share that insight, share that wisdom that you've gained over the years to the next generation that's coming along. So I think mentorship and sponsorship are critical with any organization.
Absolutely. And I think there's this opportunity for, you know, what you might call two-way mentorship, and some people call it reverse mentorship, right? Yeah. And so we can also value experience while we value new perspectives, right? Sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and that goes both ways. And going back to that generational diversity layer that we talked about earlier. And I know we're getting a little short on time, so I want to make sure that we leave enough time for our Q&A segment, but appreciate that conversation. And certainly, you know, in my experience, you know, having that proximity again to leaders, to folks that can really mentor, provide that high level sponsorship is just invaluable, right? And so I want to take a little bit of a future orientation here, and we've been sort of getting a lot of great nuggets. You know, as we look into the future of work, if you will, and the sustainability of organizations, we know that the workforce of the future will inevitably be more diverse, right? And will have certain expectations around values like inclusivity, you know, corporate citizenship, flexibility, as we're learning, particularly now through the pandemic. And so, you know, Mark brought this up earlier, you know, diverse and inclusive workforce is an actual competitive advantage, right? And I think those that acknowledge that begin preparing for that will effectively sustain themselves, right? Those that don't will be really challenged to attract and retain top talent. And I think that's just the reality, right? And so, you know, Carlos, I know you see this from a mentorship standpoint, and Mark, I assume, you know, you see your clients on the organizational psychology side, trying to figure out how do we create those conditions to attract and retain talent. But I want to really direct this question towards Jacob, being a young man of color, recently graduated, you're in the workforce now. You know, what factors were important to you when you decided to join your company, and as you were looking around and thinking about where you wanted to land? And then what do you think will attract sort of that workforce of the future?
Right. I think I was really excited about joining this panel very specifically because of the individuals that are on the panel with me. I think having the backgrounds in recruitment as well as, you know, retention and how diversity and inclusion plays a role there is highly important, because, you know, that very much directly speaks to my experience and why I chose to go and work for KPMG, the company that I work for. So Carlos was mentioning how, you know, we have kind of a responsibility to enable students of color to get a glimpse at, you know, possibly getting internships earlier and things like that. And that was actually very much my experience. I interned with the company that I'm currently working for the summer after my freshman year, which is not a very typical, it's a very new concept that's being presented in recruitment and public accounting. And I know I have brothers who studied accounting and finance as well too. And so as I've been referencing that infrastructure and having that community that you're able to, you know, have the information you need to reach the employment that you want to is highly important. But, you know, really getting a glimpse of the work that I would be doing and understanding the field that I would be going into at an early stage, as opposed to the typical phase to get an internship for a client service firm like that would be after your junior year, possibly after your senior year, the summer after. So getting that opportunity early on was highly important in my decision. And I think what it signaled to me was that not only was the company very interested in, you know, having diversity and inclusion in the immediate sense, you know, recruiting for young men of color, young women of color, diverse identities, but they were also going on the front end, as we've talked about. You know, not only is there an issue with retention and trying to build a culture that will allow people to feel and be their authentic selves when they come to work, but on the front end, you know, there is a sourcing issue as far as trying to find talent and making sure that people are, you know, seeking out these fields of studies. And so one thing that really stood out to me with the company that I work for is that KPMG has partnered with scholarship organizations as well as the ASCPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, to provide programming and funding to encourage people and provide accounting awareness programs to let people know, and people of color know, that, you know, this is a very viable career option, and the culture once you get there is constantly being improved on, and is recognizing the turnover and the issues that they face as far as, you know, diversity and inclusion. And so those were the factors certainly when I was considering my options as far as employment post undergrad.
Yeah.
Another thing to that is, you know, social justice issues. You know, I think it's so critical. A lot of young people, they want to be in an environment where they feel like their voices are being heard, like they're a part of change, they're a part of a movement, you know. And, you know, we have to be straightforward, and we have to draw a line in the sand when things happen in our society and say, either you with us or you against us, you know. Don't just sit back and just take the silent road. You know, there is no in between. You have to come out and make a stand and call it what it is. You know, when those guys attack the Capitol, you got to call it what it is. And it's just wrong. You know, you have right and you have wrong, you know, but being silent in today, in 2021, is not an option. So I like when companies really take that risk and take that initiative to really step out and make a stand on social justice issues.
Yeah, and as Jacob was saying, and I know, I could tell he's very discerning, right? that he was paying attention, right? And he had the opportunity to get some early access and exposure, which you brought up earlier, Carlos. But at the same time, he was really looking around and really, I think, taking note of what the company he's at now, over that course of interning with them, was doing in the areas of D&I, and I think these other areas of value for our future workforce. So great comments, and I wish, you know, we could go on forever and ever, I think, right? We got into great dialogue and discussion, but we've got, you know, 100+ people who are still plugged in. and I do want to make sure that we get to them. So at this time, I want to open things up for some Q&A, give our attendees that opportunity to ask our panelists questions that might have come up throughout the discussion. I think Brett has been watching the chat for questions, and we'll either pose those from the questions that he's logged, or we can bring some people off of mute to pose their questions directly.
Yes, Hassan, thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, we're going to bring a couple of people. We have Malia Dunn, who's going to join us live. Might just be on voice, and then Don is going to follow up that, and then we have a follow-up question I'll ask you. If there are any other questions, everyone, please put them in the Q&A, and we will be happy to address them. We have lots of time. Malia, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you all?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
Good. So I thank you all. This has been phenomenal, and I think my question kind of comes back to what Carlos was just referencing in terms of social justice. But earlier I was feeling stirred by the case for D&I around financial performance, because I always think like it's the right thing, but sometimes we have to use that financial performance nugget to convince some folks it's the right thing. And so I'm wondering, I listened to an interview where once Ibram X. Kendi had referenced to the question, can capitalism exist without racism? And his response was, it never has. So I'm wondering how you all navigate that space between working toward justice and profitability, or if you have thoughts around that.
Who wants to jump in on that one?
Mark, you want to go ahead?
Sure. There's an organization out there called the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. And they do a lot of great work of looking at how can we make sure that that capitalism is done the right way, right? There's a lot of well-documented oppression when it comes to getting small business loans or being able to sign leases on properties or other things like that. And I agree with you that the optics are bad and are wrong. But when you look at what some of the biggest pushes forward in equality as of late, and they're actually tied to capitalism. I remember as a high school student, we had a debate in my social studies class, and I remember this well because it became a big hot topic of should the Washington football team change their name, right? This was, this was 15 plus years ago. And it wasn't until FedEx and Nike decided to say, we will not give you money anymore, that they finally changed their name. I think that is an example of how capitalism can be used for the good of driving people forward. I think that we have the opportunity to vote every day with our dollar and do it the right way, right? If we don't like the stance that a chicken company has on a particular issue, we cannot purchase chicken from them, and we can go to their competitor and we can make it seen there. And I agree with you that it's unfortunate that sometimes it's the right thing to do isn't the argument that people will listen to, and that's not how it should be. And unfortunately it is. And so when at the heart of it, I'm a behavioral economist. And when you look at some of those pieces of it, you see that, when you tie the two things together, and the incentive structure in this country is actually getting people the results that they're looking for selfishly, or that they're fiduciarily need to, then we'll be able to drive things forward. And it's us as the consumers making sure that we hold our companies accountable.
Yeah, I think, you should always start small. Test the market. Experience is always the best teacher, right? When you expand your market and target after diverse communities and target after people of color with whatever areas of service or products that that your company represents. I think you should just test it out just to see, and you'll see that when you expand your market, there's always going to be the best business practices. I remember the story about Magic Johnson when he decided to open a Starbucks, and the comment was, well, Black people don't drink coffee. What? Black people love coffee. And so he opened a Starbucks in one of the areas of southern Los Angeles, and the company went crazy. It was a boom, and it was such a success. He went on to open 135 different Starbucks in the Black areas and Black communities across the country. So, you know, you can start out just to prove to the stakeholders that it's definitely worth the community that we should invest in. And then you'll see your dollars and see it grow from there.
Yeah, great questions, and equally great responses to those. Jacob, I don't know if you wanted to jump in there or not, but we can certainly jump to the next.
Yeah, just briefly, I just wanted to mention just something that we think about it at our company, is just as far as, you know, we do provide professional services in teams most of the time, and so we often think about, you know, what does that show as far as like how we're presenting, as far as the makeup of our teams? Are our teams mostly white male dominated? Do we have female representation? Is there a diverse set of people who are providing these services to our clients on each of our teams throughout our office? And that's a very important conversation that we have internally as well, since we are a global firm. But these conversations do happen on an office to office, even team by team basis. And so that does help, you know, as we present ourselves to our clients, you know, do we have diversity within our leadership and our personnel? So,
and there's a lot out there now. You know, a lot of information out there, a lot of research that has been done around this connection, whether you want to call it conscious capitalism, but really the business impact and financial impact that diversity and inclusion has on companies. You know, and even on the environmental, social, and governance (ESG) side, investing. I think Mark, you brought that up. This is a real thing that's getting traction, that companies are paying attention to, that investors are paying attention to. And so I think times are changing indeed. Brent, who else has a question for the panel?
Yeah, we have Donald Logan.
Hey,
Don, welcome.
Hey, Brett, they haven't called me Donald since the 8th grade. I don't mind telling you, that's been a long time ago. Good morning, everybody. Thanks to DLA and thank each of you for your participation this morning. Obviously, one of the tangibles that we can expect to take away from these dialogue sessions is education. And so my question is to Carlos, and others may weigh in as well. Earlier, Carlos, you mentioned Juneteenth celebration, and Hassan piped in that, yeah, we celebrate that too here in Arizona. A lot of our folks who are probably listening today probably don't know what Juneteenth means, the significance of that to the communities of color. So as an educational opportunity, it may be helpful for you to explain Juneteenth, its significance, and when it's celebrated. Because you're right, during the George Floyd incident, there were several communities looking to make it a national holiday because of what happened with George Floyd. But before the George Floyd, it was deemed irrelevant. So I appreciate your sharing that with the folks that are sitting in on this call.
Yeah, so the significance of Juneteenth was, as we know, back in those days, it was really separate from the North and the South, right? A lot of things that was happening in the South, it was a little bit more difficult from a slavery perspective than how things may have been in the North. It was just very different. It was unique. I know a lot of places, like on the East Coast, it was a little more progressive. A lot of from what I've heard, a lot of like artists and musicians and stuff, it was a little more progressive during those times if they were like on the East Coast versus how it was in the South. And so the significance of Juneteenth was when, you know, we've all heard Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, emancipation, we've all heard that stuff. But the significance of it was when he made that announcement and the slaves were free, the message didn't get down to the southern states until a few years later. Like it took a while for the message to kind of translate. 2 years later, for the message to get to the people in the South. And so, while we, love Abraham Lincoln and we appreciate everything he did, it's so important to represent and show and kind of show honor and just, acknowledge the idea of Juneteenth, because this is when the message finally came to, like I mentioned before, my great grandparents and people that, were, a part of my lineage, that, we were finally free, and even still, we still had to go through Jim Crow, and that's another conversation, Don. Even though we were free, we still weren't free. But there was definitely a strong significance of Juneteenth within the southern states, because that's when they finally figured out that we were free.
Yeah, and thank you for asking for that elaboration, Don. I think it was important for people to get that bit of education, particularly during Black History Month. So
yeah,
June 19th, 2021. Okay, so Black history is not only celebrated in February, some of us celebrate it every day, but particularly we celebrate emancipation every June. So thank you for that. Brent,
thank you all.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Brother Don.
Do we have time?
Yeah, thank you very much, Don. Yeah, we have time for a couple. We have a few more that I have here. Charlie Abels had asked that he can, and says he can entirely appreciate how asking where someone is from or what school they are from is appropriate, right? Because because of that socioeconomic status that we were talking about and how it's inappropriate there. But what if you're really trying to make a connection? So how do we ask those questions without risking an unintended microaggression moment?
Man, I love that question. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And here's the thing about uncomfortable conversations. It's going to be uncomfortable. You just have to just go through it. You know what I mean? And I think don't put too much thought into it. Just ask the question. Hey, Carlos, if you don't mind, I have a personal question for you. And I was like, yeah, sure. If they say sure, we've opened the gates to whatever you have to ask, and just say, hey, if you don't mind me asking, what's your ethnicity? Where are you from? I know your name is Carlos. So most people may think I'm Hispanic, but I am fully African-American. But, it's okay to just come on and ask the question. Hey, Mark, if you don't mind, I just want to ask a personal question. If that's okay with you.
And Carlos, I think you're talking about it probably in the context of someone authentically and genuinely wanting to get to know you, right?
Yeah.
Someone that you've met, maybe not in an interview setting, for example, right? And somebody wanting to get to know you and giving them the grace to ask you a question and believing that they're genuine and wanting to know, right? And I think, Mark, you brought it up earlier that when it gets a little bit dangerous, it's during things like interviews, right? And introducing some unconscious bias. So can you speak to that?
Exactly, Carlos. I'm 100% with you when it comes to, hey, we're part of new hire orientation, or we're new coworkers that are out to lunch together and having a good conversation and actually connecting with each other. I'm 100%. But when it comes to the actual job interview, where that might throw somebody off their game, or they might be off put by that, or they might not realize that you're letting the unconscious bias that SN mentioned come into it, and that's where you build the relationship around things that are job related. Hey, I saw that you studied this. What inspired you to do that? Oh, you like that? I also like that. We also have that connection there. Oh, I see that you worked at XYZ company. Tell me about a project that you really liked there. Tell me about something that you really liked with your boss. Oh, that's exactly how SN manages the team. So you're going to get along with him really well. Things like that, right? In a job interview, it's just really important to keep it job specific, not only for the legal aspect of it, but when you let all of those other things seep in, the bias goes crazy, and it's really hard for you to actually evaluate talent the right way and know, is this somebody who's going to be a good performer on our team?
I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah, and we've sort of called it, kind of labeled it, eliminate the chit chat, right? The pre-chit chat. You're going to get a chance to do that if someone comes on board and is hired, but you don't want to, disadvantage anyone in that process by introducing some of that chit chat that you may not even know is influencing your decision. So I think that's a great question and great responses there.
But now, there are some questions that may not be appropriate to ask within the workplace. You know what I mean? I mean, sexual orientation, those types of questions, I wouldn't kind of go there, but when you're just genuinely trying to connect with someone and say, hey, where you from? What college, those types of general questions, I think are perfectly fine.
Carlos, I'm going to jump in for a quick second on that one, because we had a speaker a couple of years ago who was talking about creating safe spaces. And regarding that question is, are you able to put up a picture of who your family is? So that question might actually come up, not versus in terms of like, hey, what is your sexual orientation? But it might come up, and is it safe for everyone to put their family portraits up the way that they should? So just something to toss out there.
But I think that it's different if the person leads with it and they decide to hang up their picture versus me asking the question without knowing the answer.
That's it.
I think that's where right? It's who feels comfortable and safe giving a little bit and then having a conversation after that.
Right. So I think it's making that safe space. So great job. I'm going to move on to the next question. Sorry about that, SN. This is from Cougar. He's looking to find out how will equity impact Black males over equality? Would you rather have equal or equitable? Discuss.
Jacob, we haven't heard from you for a while. I'm interested in your perspective on that, because we think about equality and equity differently. And yeah, I would be interested to hear your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, most definitely. I think something that's come up in the last, 3 or 4 years of, entering the workforce and also being in college and trying to maneuver the recruitment process, something that's come up is recognizing the agency that individual have as far as really the peaks of whatever it may be that they want to reach. In this case, I'll be referencing their careers. And there have been conversations that I've had with individuals who come from a very similar background to me. They're Latino or they're Hispanic American, and they've told me that based off of my experience, how I've said, I've been a part of a diversity and inclusion program and diversity and inclusion internship, and that was a way that I was able to, have an avenue into the company that I'm working for now earlier, so that way I can kind of have that adjustment period. But I've had individuals, like I said, come from a similar economic and socioeconomic background and tell me, that's not something I would be personally interested. I want to be looked at strictly based off my merits, and they kind of take it as a slight as far as that goes, and they don't want anything to do with diversity and inclusion programs. And so, it's definitely a personal question that people have to ask themselves. And so I don't think it's something that can be generally and broadly applied necessarily, but it's something that we should all kind of be aware of, just as far as striking a balance between, providing more opportunities for equitable employment, but at the same time recognizing the individual agency that people have and the pure merits that they bring to the table.
Yeah, thank you for that. Carlos and Mark, how about your response to that question, if you want to jump in?
I would just say, what are the things within your organization that have stopped the equitable or equal hiring practices, or what are the reasons that this organization looks the way that it does? And what are the nuanced changes, right? We talk about systemic change, and it happens throughout that employee life cycle, at least that I've seen, right? And so, where you're recruiting people from, right? As Carlos talked about earlier, how you're mentoring them, as Jacob's hit on. I think that all of those things are good questions.
Absolutely. Thank you both, everyone. We do have 2 other questions that I'm going to save. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to email them off to our panelists. And then when we post, because we post all of this on our DLA webpage and on YouTube, we're going to put a little an answer to those 2 final questions that we have. So I'm going to hand it back over to Essen really fast to finish us all off.
Yeah, and thank you for, I wish we could get to all the questions, but I appreciate those of you that posed the questions to our panelists. So as we sort of close things out today, you know, I wanted to restate that one of our goals on today's panel, which was to provide everyone with that sense of how they can play a role in actually advancing equity, particularly for men of color. So I want to just invite our audience today to share in the chat feature, what one action can you take and what will you do to apply what you heard and learned today to the topic that we're discussing. So jump in the chat. I think when we write things down and take action and decisions, then we have more of a likelihood that we'll actually follow through. So if we can do that and take just a second to do that, I would really appreciate it. And I think others will learn from what you place in the chat as well. And so as you do that, you know, I just want to sincerely thank our panel for joining us today, particularly from other places outside of Arizona. It's been a pleasure. I think it's been fun. I've had a great time, and I think it's been a great workshop. And so at this time, yeah, I'll turn things back over to Joanna to close us out. Joanna?
Wonderful. Yay! Cheers. You guys are amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you, gentlemen. You were, yes, I am with you, Stephanie and Heather. You guys were amazing. Thank you for the level of transparency. Thank you for the genuine and authentic conversation and just being open and honest. I think that lends to such a rich conversation, and thank you for allowing us to learn from you. I really enjoyed being able to hear each and every one of your perspectives and your stories, and I think that this is what it's all about. I think the more we can have conversations of this nature, the more we can be allies, the more that we can really kind of peel back, and the closer we can get to changing the system. That is the only way that this happens, right? Is to get in a place where we can have awkward conversations often. And it's not that it won't be awkward, is that we will get more comfortable with the awkwardness, if you would. And that is the only way that this changes. And hopefully we have it sooner and earlier. I have these conversations with my kids and they're like, Mom, this is so weird. I'm like, yes, it is. That's my answer. You know, yes, it is. And they go, okay, so we're still having it? Yes, we are. Yeah. That's it. And that's it. And we have it often. And it's in that space that they learn and they grow. And I break them open only to put them back together in a different way. And that's the idea of it. So I thank you. I am grateful to all of you, but I'm also grateful to our DLA board of directors and also our fearless leadership with co-founder Mr. Marion Kelly, who I know joined us a little later in the program. It's through their guidance that we're really able to do the work that we do. And also thank you to our DLA Education Committee led by Dr. Mallory Titel. And we had some of the DLA Education Committee members on with us today. A very, very special thank you to Education Committee member Tandra Richardson. She was responsible for really cultivating this entire workshop and securing our panelists and developing the content for this month's workshop. You will be able to see her and Dr. Brett Scholar in our deep dive on the 25th, coming up a little later in this month, where we're gonna do a 1-hour deep dive just to make sure you guys have a good understanding of this topic and to further make sure that we are having an informal discussion. We are so grateful for your support. Speaking of support, we can't do this work without the support of our sponsors. So I just want to, at this time, say a special thank you to the sponsors responsible for today's programming. I want to ensure that I thank Tegna Foundation Channel 12 for awarding DLA with the 2021 Programming Grant. A special thank you to Emily Mowers and Carrie Watts, and also to Mayo Clinic for the Everybody in Fund for Change grants. They're also responsible for funding today's program. And also to Black Philanthropy Initiatives Grant Fund and Ms. Kim Covington, my dear friend from the Arizona Community Foundation, who also supports this program. As we close out today, I just want to remind you that the dialogue series continues. So we will actually be continuing this dialogue February 25th with the 1 hour chat. And so make sure that you all join Dr. Brent Scholar and Tom Richardson for that 1 hour chat. And you don't have to kind of formally register for it. You can just kind of click on that link and go through that. And we will also be doing our March workshop coming up for Women's History Month. So that is coming up. And I think that registration is already open. So that's going to be on March 11th. So that date is going to be up on our website and you'll be able to register for that. So I just want to make a plea with you. This is DLA's 20th anniversary. We have been doing this amazing work for 20 years. So here's my plea to you. If you've enjoyed today's workshop and content, and you've walked away with some amazing information that you can use in your arsenal of work, would you consider supporting DLA further? So we're asking a simple ask today. Would you consider making a $20 donation or more in order to help us celebrate our 20th anniversary year? Your donations help us continue to make these vital dialogues free to the community. It helps keep our workshops and all of the contents like this complimentary to anyone that wants to attend. In the chat area, you'll see a link to make the donations online. DLA is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we're very proud of the fact that what we do is keep content like this at no cost. What we don't want is to have content like this, information that is vital to the community, to be another barrier to entry. All of your donations are tax deductible. So that's our simple ask for the day. We are so grateful to all of you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you so much for your support. Again, a special thank you to our moderator, a special thank you to all of our panelists, Mr. Asen Otu, Carlos Mavens, Jacob Quintana, and Dr. Mark Pryon. Enjoy your day. Happy Black History Month to all of you, and thank you so much. Cheers, everyone.